Welcome to the first session of the afternoon, and here we go. We're going to get started right on time, and I'm Norman Meyer. I'm your host for today, and I think we've got an exciting session to deal with court trends the next 10 years. We've got three speakers today. We've got two guys from Arizona, one guy from New Mexico, Peter, Phil, and John. They said don't introduce them otherwise, so go.
Thank you so very much. Thanks for coming today. We've been studying the future of the courts. We've been doing a study on the future of the courts now since 2012. And so part of this is we're going to be sharing with you some of the results of 5 different surveys that we have run on various scenarios on the future of the courts that we have run over about the past 4 years. I do want to start by warning you that we do conduct a highly audience interactive session. We not only accept your questions and comments, we actually crave them. This program doesn't actually work all that well without you taking a very active role. So do not hold back, raise your hand. We'll get the handheld mic to you for your questions and your comments about the various snapshots that we'll be presenting today.
Okay, thanks, Peter. And we have, as Peter said, we have 3 mics, we have 1 camera, and to be kind to the camera guy in the back, John and I will pretty much stay fastened to this podium and this mic, but Norman has agreed to run the mic on that side, and Peter will be there. I'm sure the camera will try to follow one or the other when they go to you when you have questions or comments. We conducted this, the 3 of us conducted this almost, I was going to say same, but and it does say repeat, but what you'll see if you were here yesterday, and I don't know if anybody wanted to do this twice, but you're not really going to do it twice. We will have 3 snapshots. Only the first is a repeat from yesterday. We thought to make it a little bit better, we would have 3 different snapshots and scenarios to be considered. And we identified those of the 140 that we actually have in this 4+ year survey taking. We have now 140 different scenarios to be considered. We picked now over the course of these last 2 days, we have used 5 of those 140. We picked these out because we thought they would be of real interest to the attendees at NACM. Oftentimes, when we do plan maybe a year out, and we often have a rosy picture of what we might expect. Now, those of us in courts, we typically understand that we're doing a 3 or a 5 year lookout on our strategic planning. And what we want to do today, though, and what we'll challenge you to do, is look out 10 years. Hopefully some of you here, and there's about 50 or 60 people, I would imagine, have taken part in the survey over this period of time. We are on our 5th survey release. We're still taking in results now. We're actually sending around to all of you a place where some paper on
there's a sign-up sheet
for you if you want to consider being included and enlisted to take the surveys in the future. But as I said, when you have the opportunity, there's one on the 3rd table here. I think that's what you're looking at. When you do have the opportunity to vote on your phones or your tablets, please consider not what you hope will be happening or what to expect when you look out the 10 years, but in your line of business and why we think this is so much better than asking a few experts in the field, asking a broad number of people in the industry, in this industry, what they believe. What you'll see in a couple of slides is that we have a continuum, if you will, and we display that here, the mean probability categories. So as we send out those surveys and we ask the takers, what do you think the probabilities of this particular thing happening? If they put 1, it's going to end up on your right-hand side, as you see that 1 to 1.9. And as we average these all in, if there's some 5s in there and some 4s, typically it's going to end up on the left-hand side of this chart. And you actually have bookmarks with the website to go to as well. As I said, there are 140 different scenarios to date, and also too, it's still, this number is climbing. We've had over 1,000 different discrete people take this. There's probably closer to 1,700 total surveys that have been compiled at this point, but 1,000 different people have taken the survey over this 4+ years. Today we're going to look at 3 topics, as I said, that we think you'll find of some interest. We're going to ask, and I'm kind of giving you this format here, then we're going to ask a total of 6, 2 at a time, of the folks that have agreed before we started this afternoon to come up here and read those snapshots off. And they'll have, quite different approaches to what you might think of the particular snapshot. And then we'll go over those, and then we'll ask you your opinion. Okay?
Scenario 1 is, will we be in the driverless car world in 10 years? Yes, no. Why talk about this one? The car companies and the tech companies are spending billions today on this development. It's really taken off in the last couple of years. Why? Because of the huge potential impact on our whole structure and on their businesses. If we get rid of people driving cars and the technology drives the cars appropriately, we will eliminate at least 38,000 unnecessary deaths in this country every year. The Associated Press now trains its reporters not to use the term automobile accident because it's not accidental. It is negligent or inattentive or inappropriate or unlawful operation of a motor vehicle by a person. That's not accidental. So they tell their reporters to talk about car crashes. And when we go to driverless cars, we will no longer have moving violations. We will have no traffic cases. We will have no traffic courts to resolve those cases, and we will have no fine and fees revenues derived from that type of case. There'll also be other profound changes. Elimination of congestion on our roads. The traffic engineers tell us that even in Seattle, there's enough roads to get people to and from work and home. If it's just the problem is the drivers. And we will have a dramatic reduction in the ownership of automobiles themselves. If you can just get on your phone and have a driverless car drive up and pick you up, why have one yourself? Unless you're part of the 1% and you just want your supreme luxury vehicle. What about garages? You think you got a bunch of junk in your garage today? What if you don't have any car to put in your garage? What about downtown garages and the freeing up of enormous public space? On the other hand, to get here, one, we've got to get it right. And you do know that Tesla has now admitted that one of their test drivers was killed a few months ago because it didn't work. And Tesla's model is the least aggressive technology. They are trying to build a process that supports a human driver. Google is going to replace the human driver. But all of these things not only require that it will work, but they also require that the laws will change so that people will no longer be able in urban areas to drive their own cars. Because we, the drivers, are the problem. And to the extent that there would be a mix of driverless and drivered cars, it's not going to work. So, what do you think the likelihood that we will reach that in 10 years?
So with that, we will ask our two brave volunteers, Danielle Short and Debbie Spradley, to come forward and recite for you Snapshot B, January 5th, 2026. Here we go.
Okay, imagine Monday morning, January 5th, 2026. I'm Danielle Short, Court Administrator for the Midtown Municipal Court. The trends have been clear for some time. Even back in 2016, car companies like Mercedes-Benz, Volvo, and even Tesla were building cars, albeit expensive ones, that actively brake to avoid accidents. Backup cameras became law in late 2018. By the early 2020s, long-haul trucks had self-driving functions for superhighways. Car companies started solving many of the common road hazard problems drivers face in an unpredictable driving world. Now, by 2026, traffic citations, traffic accidents, and traffic arrests have plummeted. Traffic deaths, which reached peak in 1980, have continued to decline, and thousands of lives have been saved every year. The downside for my court: minor traffic is no longer the behind-the-scenes revenue generator it once was. Traffic court business just isn't what it used to be. Some interesting sidelights. Drunk and impaired driving is down, since drunks technically aren't driving the car. State legislatures are grappling with that question of what constitutes an intoxicated driver if the vehicle is self-driving. I'm glad society is safer, but honestly, I'm scrambling for funding like I've never had to before.
So it's Monday morning, January 5th, 2026. I'm Debbie Spradley, Court Administrator for the Midtown Municipal Court. Like hoverboards and personal jetpacks, self-driving cars sounded like a great idea a decade ago, but the reality has never lived up to the hype. Technological changes have made vehicles safer. In the end, however, the public realized that a computer will never replace a rational human driver behind the wheel. Back in 2016, car companies were building cars that stopped before a distracted driver would react. Despite many refinements, though, self-driving cars never overcame several real-world hurdles. Those are: 1, self-driving cars got better at defensive driving against some types of unpredictable driving, but they were never perfect. When an accident occurred, the public always blamed the driverless car. 2, self-driving cars got better at driving in bad weather, but when visibility and road conditions deteriorated, accidents happened. The public always blamed the self-driving car. 3, finally, self-driving cars couldn't make on-the-spot moral decisions. Do you run into a light pole to avoid mowing down a child who had darted out into traffic? Although tickets and accidents are down, human drivers, human error, and traffic courts are still big. Our court's business and our court's revenue stream is still pretty secure.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. All right, as you see up here, what we've tried to do is summarize what was read to you by both of these ladies. And under Snapshot A, you can read here, car companies are investing in the concept. You heard John give you some background on that. There are already many safety devices being placed on vehicles. We have some of those that we didn't even know about 5 years ago on cars we're buying now. Traffic cases could be plummeting, and laws will have to change to keep up with the industry and the new devices that are being put on these cars. Snapshot B. Safety improves, but the fad fades, if this is where you're going as far as a vote. Too many logistical hurdles like bad drivers and bad roads, and traffic filings remain constant. So if you prefer B, if you think that one or the other is more likely to happen 10 years from now, as you heard them read, this is 2026. So if you can mentally put yourself out into 2026.
So now is the time to take out your smartphone and vote for the snapshot you think is most likely to occur within the next 10 years. Snapshot A or snapshot B. Did it refresh? Okay.
Did anybody come in late that didn't see the site? Do you have it? The site?
The site is up here at the top, and the command line of your smartphone, pollev.com/court futures, and it should take you to this vote.
And you would need to go through there without going through a search engine.
Yeah, don't go through Google or anything. So.
Google can't drive you to the site.
We actually leave this open just to watch the little bars rise and fall, sort of like the NASDAQ, you know. So, okay. So, okay.
Peter, when you say never, you mean within 10 years? Like there are scenarios 10 years out?
Right.
Yes, you can assume, never meaning it ain't happening by 2026. But you're also a confirmed Luddite and you don't think this is ever going to happen. And I believe you made that perfectly clear at the last presentation, Liz. All right.
Let's hear comments.
So,
Yeah, this kept you anonymous for a little bit. Anybody, whether you want
why
to
do so many people,
weigh in or not and go with, anybody want to comment on A, whether you press the button in the minority or not? Any comment on what your thoughts are as to why that was a better choice for 10 years out?
No one wants to admit that they voted for it.
Over here.
I think it could be a reality.
Oh, Norman, you're supposed to have the mic.
It could be a reality just in the fact of looking back 10 years ago. Think of what kind of phone you were using at that time. Usually you had a camera, you had a cell phone, you had all these, video, whatever. Now you can all do everything on a phone. So if you think of how quickly technology has progressed in the last 10 years, I think it is, likely we could be there in 10 years.
The whole concept of self-driving cars is quite the rage. I am fascinated by what the 26 of you who said that it just isn't going to happen. We get to 2026, and the whole concept of the self-driving car is just not going to occur. What is it about the concept which makes you not believe it's going to happen? Somebody who's brave enough. Yes, ma'am.
We have a comment here first, Peter.
Okay.
You want to go ahead up?
Sure. Go, Liz.
I just think that a couple things. First of all, we have so many rural and rural-urban mix areas that I think getting to a fully automated self-driving car system is going to be really challenging. I think about, my county is 4,400 square miles, but we have a small urban area in the middle. I find that more challenging that in 10 years, that you can make a blanket statement that everywhere. Maybe in 10 years there'll be a little inroad somewhere where, a large metro area or something has a self-driving core or something. But I can't see it yet where we're at.
I think the technology may advance far enough in 10 years, but I don't think the cost will come down to make it feasible for it to be, a widespread use. I agree that it may be in certain urban areas or pockets, but I can't see 10 years as a long enough time frame to get there.
Okay.
Any of the 27 of you that weighed in on B, anyone else want to comment?
Sure. I get it.
Ultimately, I don't want to give up control of the car. I don't like it when my wife drives, let alone a machine driving. So, I want to have my hands on the wheel. I want to be in control of that vehicle, and I think a lot of people feel so.
We had a comment at the last session, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, that the lady said, we have all these red light cameras. I don't want to trust a self-driving vehicle which will stop when it's supposed to stop. To which I said, so you want to run the red light and you want to be the one behind the wheel? And she said, yeah, that's it.
Paula?
I was going to say, one of the things that there may also be a generational shift. I have a 16-year-old daughter right now who I am forcing to learn how to drive.
You're not the first one to have
And
said that.
she's not interested. None of her classmates are interested. They can communicate just well with their friends. And so the extra sort of responsibility of driving a car, they have no interest whatsoever. And so those of us who sort of grew up and driving a car was our ticket to freedom, there's going to be a generational shift. And I'm thinking about, hopefully not in 10 years. My grandmother was driving till she was over 100. But there is going to be sort of a group that gets into their 70s and 80s where having a self-driving car is actually going to keep them mobile. Mm-hmm. And so there's that true. Piece that I think needs to factor in here.
Though I share your perspective in the respect of speaking for all geezerdom, as I am, I'm ashamed to say that, yes, the very day I turned 16 years old, I was dragging my mom down to the Connecticut DMV, driving off the road onto the shoulder continually, having my mother scream, but I was going to get my license. This is not the way it is anymore, is it? Many folks have said that their kids just don't find the allure of getting behind the wheel.
Okay, any other comments before we go over some of the survey results? There's one in the back.
So, can I sneak through here, Bob? Thanks.
I guess I think there are two issues. One, it will be fine in a closed system, but open roads, I don't know. And until the insurance liability issue is resolved, Tesla, GM, they don't want to take the responsibility for every accident. So.
Two of you have now made an interesting comment, and I want to follow up on that, and that is that the prospect is that it may be in a very centralized urban area as opposed to potentially out on the superhighway. I mean, there has been some discussion that I've seen is that where you might see this first, long-haul truckers out on the superhighway, because if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, these guys are scooting along, they might be able to do it. How many of you think that it's going to happen if it does happen? And I'm not trying to take anything away from the 27. But if it does happen, it would be in an urban environment first. How many of you think it would be in a rural, or let's say the superhighway environment? How many in the urban?
Those last two are different.
Yeah.
See, I said closed.
Closed?
Closed could be on the highway.
Okay, so you're not eliminated. You, on the other hand, mentioned in the inner city, I think. So, anyone thinking that it would be in the inner city? A couple? Yeah, if it does happen, how many of you think that it would be like up on the superhighways, possibly for long-haul truckers? So that may be a more possible scenario. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So.
Okay, let's go through some of the survey results. As you heard, we're on our 5th survey. We identified some of the questions that we had sent out that match up fairly closely to what we just discussed. And self-driving vehicles will be commonplace on the road within the next 10 years was a question. We posed this scenario in 2015 with 466 respondents worldwide, gauged the probability of unlikely with an average assessment, as we said, of 3.2 if you track that at the bottom. Only respondents in Florida and New Zealand thought the concept had even a 50-50 chance of occurring. For whatever reason, but at least identifying Florida and New Zealand,
the camaraderie between the Kiwis and
show you that we have the ability to drill down and identify not only cohorts in different area, geographic, but also age distribution.
But not in Washington State.
We can do that in Washington State.
I was going to say, well, what was the response?
Oh,
no,
you
they
probably
were unlikely. They didn't see it, and no other geographic area changed. Everybody else was pretty unlikely. A fair number of sort of hell no. Yeah.
Now, another related scenario is intermediate sanctions will dominate criminal and traffic. We offered this scenario in 2013, 233 respondents, and they gave it a likely with an average of 2.1. The interesting note here is that limited jurisdiction respondents and Gen Xers were slightly more skeptical with a 2.4 average assessment to that question. Okay.
Okay.
Next scenario is the extent to which we are going to get away. It's the same issue of fees and fines, but are we going to get away from having our municipal and limited jurisdiction courts be a revenue generating model? We've had 3 plenaries here in the last 2 days focused on Ferguson itself in Missouri, on the CCJ Casca Joint Committee to investigate it on a nationwide basis, and the ABA focus on implicit bias. And the racial implication or the racial disparity in the impacts of these limited jurisdiction fee and fine collection processes. So the question before you will be whether these initiatives are going to take hold and make a big difference, or whether our traditional ability to choose to do things the way we've always done them will prevail. And you heard some of that from the Ferguson report as well, that it turned out only in St. Louis was there really a problem. The rest of Missouri is doing just fine, thank you. So we'll continue to get all the fines and fees revenue from those jurisdictions.
And with that, we'll call our second set of brave volunteers, Serpy Ergen and Tammy Washington, to come up and recite Snapshot 2.
Okay. It's Monday, January 5th, 2026. I'm Court Administrator Serpy Ergen for the Maine County Circuit Court. Concerns about the justice system being fundamentally unfair to the poor began after the 2015 Department of Justice report on Ferguson, Missouri over a decade ago. Much of the attention centered on law enforcement, but courts didn't escape criticism. There were many stories of a justice system that was designed to bilk those in poverty. Meanwhile, court user fees multiplied. Courts charged to set up time payment schedules, charged for probation visits, charged for traffic school cases, shoplifting classes, anger management classes, and drug testing. State legislatures passed laws preventing judges from waiving many of these fees, even if judges wanted to. Finally, judges felt that they had to take some action. With the help of the Conference of Chief Justices and State Court Administrators, state associations lobbied legislatures. The aim was to help restore public trust and confidence by reclaiming judicial discretion and allowing judges full flexibility in imposing and modifying fees. Lobbying by other groups also forced legislatures to cap the total amount of user fees that could be imposed on defendants.
It's Monday, January 5th, 2026. I'm Court Administrator Tammy Washington for the Maine County Circuit Court. Although concern over fundamental unfairness in the justice system got a lot of coverage back in 2015, it has never become an overwhelming issue for our community. Our court has lots of user fees for things such as viewing electronic records, establishing time payment schedules, visiting with one's probation officer, traffic school, even getting arrested and booked into jail. These fees help keep our court financially viable, and they are all authorized by law or court rule. Our hearts go out to the destitute when post-sentence user fees keep mounting, but our court is bound by directives of our state legislature and Supreme Court. If the do-gooder groups have a complaint with the fees, take it up with the legislature. Also, let's face it, just because someone owes a lot of money doesn't actually mean the system expects them to pay. Often these debts are turned into civil judgments. Defendants, now parties, can always appear in civil court to contest the debt if they choose, and access to justice continues.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
To recap the choices, snapshot A, the news stories of the justice system taking advantage of the poor become prevalent. Courts have relied on user fee revenue. Courts and judges finally lobby to restore judicial discretion. If you believe that will happen between now and 2026, or by at least by 10 years out. Or on the opposite side, snapshot B, media stories fade. Fines and fees are a valid sanction. Courts point to legislatures for fees imposed by statute.
To take out your smartphone and vote for the scenario you think is most likely.
Yeah. Well, let's start the discussion with A this time, since it's fairly overwhelming. Anyone want to weigh in as to what pushed them to go with scenario A? You're among a lot of friends, so I think what you say would be at least 28 others.
Well, this is really what I'm hoping is going to happen. There's no guarantee, but I think it's the direction that we should be going in. That there needs to be a change.
There's a subtext that I have been hearing throughout this conference concerning this issue about justice reform, and I want to throw this out to you, and that is this, and we tried to bake this into the snapshot, is that though the courts are deeply involved, the folks who are going to be the real decision makers is the state legislature. These fines, these fees, these user fees are in many courts, if not most courts, statutorily imposed or imposed by court rule through the Supreme Court. And therefore, a lot of folks have said, this is a real problem, but it's not our problem with a trial court. Take it up with the state legislature. Is this if you voted for snapshot A, I'm thinking that there's assumption that we in the courts now own this problem. Do we have an issue about the fact that we're trying to influence another branch of government? Or is there some other solution that I'm looking that I'm not seeing? Is this just the other branch of government? Yes.
I knew you couldn't stay off of
I
this
know.
one.
I tried to promise Debbie that I would, but it didn't happen. I guess the part of the question that can not confuse me, but will courts be accused? I think courts are always accused of doing things regardless of whether they're not. I think this is solely in the hands of the court. The United States Supreme Court ruled in Bearden versus Georgia in 1983 what the standard was, that when a person could be found in contempt of court for failure to pay a fine, and it would have to be that the person willfully is not paying, not because they are indigent to do so. I personally handle approximately 100 order to show cause cases a week for people who have failed to pay their fines. Those that show up, it is rare, I mean, very rare in the 22 years that I have been a judge, that someone will say to me, I'm not paying your fine. And yes, you will get those people, and it's usually because they have a mental health issue. Most of them say, I can't pay it. This is how much money I'm making. So as a judge, to hold somebody in willful contempt at that point would be a legal error on my part to do so. So we already have the rulings in front of us. This has nothing to do with the legislature. I mean, am I happy about the 83% surcharges that they attach to all fines in the state of Arizona? No, I am not. But at the end of the day, if somebody is willfully in contempt of court, then we can do something. Our court chooses not to incarcerate. We never have incarcerated people for failure to pay. But I mean, that is the only time that a judge can do that, if they willfully find somebody in contempt. And if they haven't made that finding, then they cannot do so. So the legal precedent by the United States Supreme Court is present. And it is our duty as judges to follow the law. So I don't even know how this is happening. You know, I've heard the horror stories for the last 2 days about how the badness of municipal court judges, of which I am one. And I struggle with this because it's the legal, the authority of the Constitution, as well as federal law, as well as recent in 1983 is there. So I do see this changing.
Okay. You know, that last picture is going in the court manager. I just haven't figured out what I'll put on there.
Who's the editor of that?
Yeah.
So just to follow up, though, on one aspect, that there are state legislatures that have been passing fees of which they say that the courts are not allowed to waive those fees. So, and then there was the discussion that would be unconstitutional anyway. Is that what you're thinking? Or? No. Oh, okay.
I'm not saying, I mean, our own legislature has said that, you know, the whole surcharge in Arizona, we've had a lot of changes with community service hours in passing, and you're able to do this. What I am saying is we're not talking about waiving those fees if they're not, if you live in a jurisdiction where they said these fees cannot be waived, that doesn't mean that there aren't other tools available to you. Put them on a payment program of $5 a month. I mean, if that's the way it has to get paid, then that's the way that it gets paid. So, I mean, judges can utilize other tools, even though there are mandatory minimum sentences, as there are in Arizona for misdemeanor fines, and I'm sure there are throughout the country. There are ways that judges have of following the law. You either hold somebody in contempt, you don't hold them in contempt, and even if you do hold them in contempt, where you're feeling as though this is a willful exercise on this person's part not to pay the fine, you don't have to put them in jail. I mean, and that's usually ridiculous anyway, even if that's the way you were going, because I'm sure your jurisdiction is charged to incarcerate somebody. So then you have that fee extended. There are ways, though, even if the fine is mandatory. As I said, you have the ability to put people on payment programs. And I'm sure if it's like $2 a month, $5 a month, and yes, I know all of you that are administrators are, get those cases finished, get those cases finished. That's not a great deal on your aspect of it, but I think that solves the problem. Peter.
Your Honor.
Any other comments?
Other comments?
You stymied them. Nobody's going to follow that, right?
We didn't get any comments from the bees.
And we're not going to now. There's some brave soul.
I usually don't know when to keep my mouth shut, so I'll talk for the bees. I answered B not because that's my desired outcome, but because I think it's the likely outcome. I'll agree with. I'm from New Mexico, so with the judge from my neighboring sister state of Arizona, that yeah, it's going to be up to judges to come up with something creative in the courtroom to figure this out. It is hard for me to imagine legislators voluntarily nixing these required fees. We just added one last year or the year before. In New Mexico, it's like the 15th fee on a judge when you get convicted of a felony. We don't do anything to collect them; they're just there because you have to order them. They're mandatory. But I think it's going to be put courts in a very difficult spot to go back to the legislature and say, hey, you guys got to nix these fees, and by the way, give us some more money in our budgets. And the legislatures are looking at us like we're crazy, even though we collect almost no money on these fees. But they're acting like we're not going to be a real partner there. And so I think that's going to be a really tough sell. So I took the somewhat pessimistic view of B on this.
Though I want to get this straight, if I heard you correctly, and I just want to see if this, just sort of follow this through, is that what we're sort of doing is creating this theoretical construct, which really isn't going to be based in reality. It's going to be like, yeah, there are all these fees, but wink, wink, nod, nod. Don't worry, you're not really going to have to do it. It's, something will work out. There will be this, I don't know what you call it, this informal arrangement. Don't worry, it'll all be taken care of. I mean, it's sounding almost like a reversion back to the old truth in sentencing days. If you remember that everybody was getting more and more upset when you were sentenced to long periods of time in prison, but everyone said, don't worry, wink, wink, nod, nod. It wasn't really going to happen. Is that what we're talking about here? Sure.
I would say that that's my concern. I certainly don't want it to go in that direction, but I'm concerned that that's where we're headed, or at least where I see things moving is judges are required to order these by statute. It's probably not constitutional to enforce them. We don't want to enforce them. And so they're just kind of sitting out there. And we're not responsible in New Mexico. We're not responsible for collecting them, so we never do anything because they don't go to our budget anyway. They just go to the general fund. So we just get left with this odd sort of detente sort of spot.
And, to feed on that, the bigger concern would be is if we as the courts were responsible for collecting, and I could absolutely see an attack on the courts, particularly in tight budget times. By the press and by others saying, hey, you've got millions of dollars in outstanding fees and fines. You guys need to be collecting those, or you may find yourself not with the kind of general fund appropriations that you need. That to me is just a lot scarier than the possibility that we're creating this debtor prison, for lack of a better way of putting it. So that scares me.
Well, Peter, let's move to some of the surveys and then the final snapshots. But last year in 2015, we had a scenario in our survey, courts accused of facilitating the reappearance of debtors' prison. Overall, the responses were unlikely with 3.3 as assessment. Baby boomers thought that it was improbable, actually, with 3.5, where millennials thought it had a 50-50 chance at 2.9. We also presented user-based fees dramatically increased in 2015. Respondents assessed this as likely at 2.2. And to continue on some of the survey scenarios, courts will increase user-based revenue. In 2013, we sent this out to for our survey takers. 181 respondents gave it a highly likely with 1.8 average. And then the gap between rich and poor becomes the overriding societal challenge. In the 2015 survey, 467 respondents assessed it at 2.2 average. Folks from the National Center for State Courts thought this scenario was highly likely at 1.9 average. People that took it from Washington State thought it was highly likely with 1.8. Those from California thought it had a 50-50 chance at 2.7. So the difference. John?
Just to go back for this for just a second, I mean, you can see the disconnect that what we're talking about, we've been talking about justice reform, and fines and fees have been a big part of it. Yet we think we're going to find more ways to have user fees, and those user fees are going to go up. And yet we also think the rich are going to get richer and the poor are going to get poorer. So, okay, let's go to the third and last snapshot.
The last one is, will the courts start recognizing the professionalism of court administrators and deferring administrative decisions increasingly to trained professional administrators? Why would they? Because our public funding issues are going to continue as we have more retired people taking public revenue and fewer working people producing it. The public perception of the courts is that we are inefficient, particularly in the use of automation. When asked if they're willing to invest more money in the courts for automation, they say, why spend good money after bad? They'll just waste it too. Our courts have become increasingly complex with specialty courts, technology contracts, union issues. So we need the expertise of professional managers. What Fortune 500 company has ever hired a judge to run it? On the other hand, judges are responsible for the courts, and they are not going to give up that responsibility. The last thing in the world they want is to live in the hospital environment where the administrator tell the doctors what to do. Ain't gonna happen.
This, I didn't check. I'm hoping you're here. Rick Pierce? Rick? Excellent. Thank you. And Tammy Washington? Tammy? Oh, no, Tammy Lambie. Sorry. There she is. Thank you.
I think we all know what date it is, but I'll say it anyway. It's Monday, January 5th, 2026. I'm Rick Pierce, the court administrator for the Central City Superior Court. Court operations in my jurisdiction began to get super complex as far back as the year 2000. We were hiring more knowledge professionals, such as mediators, infant and toddler therapists, probate accountants, information processing specialists, interpreters, problem-solving court counselors, paralegals, just to name a few. We were outsourcing functions, which meant more contracts with more vendors. Information and communications technology systems were linked to agencies and groups. New laws and court rules continue to get more complex. Chronic funding shortages drove us to look for imaginative funding sources. New construction called for intense collaboration with other branches of government. At the bench meetings, most judges didn't understand the subtleties and nuances of a lot of the issues facing the court. I did my best to explain these complex issues, but the judges often accepted my professional advice and counsel. Ultimately, the judges look to me to make final decisions on administrative and organizational matters. Why not? The judges are experts in the law and legal procedure. I'm the expert at management, and I'm also a very confident person, I guess.
Good afternoon. It's Monday, January 5th, 2026. I'm Tammy Lambie. I'm Court Administrator for the Central City Superior Court. Although courts have become increasingly complex, basic governance hasn't changed. Yes, we have more knowledge professionals on staff like mediators, counsels, probate accountants, information processing specialists, and interpreters. The court outsources more functions. We have more contracts and integrate agreements. Information and communications technology has become more interconnected. At bench meetings, my job is to simply explain complicated issues to the judges, who may or may not completely understand what is going on. I can offer my input, but the judge's decision discusses the issues and decides how things are to be done. Let's face it, this includes judges getting into the weeds and micromanaging, but that's the job I signed up for. The judges make final decisions. Sometimes those decisions are on general policy issues. Sometimes they decide their decision is to tell me, to tell staff which local restaurants are off limits for them to eat lunch at.
Okay, thank you. All right, you know the format at this point, I think, but I'll go over the snapshots for you. Snapshot A, again, we're out 2026. More knowledge professionals in the courts, more complex technology, more contracts and vendors to deal with. Judges defer to the court administrator for decision making. Or snapshot B, administrator's job is to explain things to the judges. Judges will still decide policy and operations, and the administrator carries out the decisions made by the bench.
Okay, it's time to vote. Oh, you've already voted. All three of you. 4.
At least poll everywhere has been flawless today.
Yes. We are happy campers for that.
We have a bright future by the looks of things. All right, as we're running out of time and as we're looking at these numbers coming in, anybody want to offer their position as to, yes, you've got the mic.
I may be the host, but I have the mic. I voted on the B side, a pessimist. And the reason why I said that is that I've been in the profession for 37 years, and I saw a big boom in court administration, and I'm part of it. When graduate programs were created in the 70s at 3 different graduate schools, one of which is still standing.
Thank you, Norman.
The 2 of them have died. Have you noticed that there weren't MSU classes at this conference? What happened? What's going on there? I work in the federal court system, and I'm seeing a lot of my peers who are boomers retiring and being replaced as clerks of court, which is the court administrator. And I'm distressed by the number of appointments that are happening, which I don't consider to be professional court administrators. They're people coming out of the JAG Corps from the military side, or from other sources, which I don't view as being professional court administrators. So I'm probably out of touch with what's going on somewhat in the state courts, but I see signs that are not good in the profession, and so I'm pessimistic.
Okay.
And I voted on the A side, and the reason that I voted on the A side is because even though I am exiting my profession, there are a lot of my colleagues that are presiding judges, at least in Arizona, that are younger, that have years to go, that I have been very impressed with their recognition of that it is a team approach to administration, and that it is the administrator who is the one that is leading that team approach on administrative ideas. Also me, even though being older, I owe it to John Gracian, who I read an article that you wrote in 1999 in the ABA Journal about how they should quit appointing presiding judges based on the Peter Principle, that they should start having administrative experience, which was my inspiration to go back to school, get a master's degree in public administration before I applied for a position as a presiding judge. There are a lot of judges that are younger than I am that are coming up through the ranks, at least in Arizona, that are very much of the same accord. And our Supreme Court has executive training and recognition and programs for people who want those. And we noticed just for the people that applied for my position, a lot of those people had gone through those programs at the AOC to get that experience. So here to all of you, the court administrators.
Thank you.
I must say that even though I had to pick between A and B, and I did select A, I can see both sides here. I will start with be the pessimist and see that I think we all understand that this is, some respects, personality driven. Dependent upon who is the individual, the jurist that's going to be presiding over this matter is going to make that decision whether it's going to be a strong administrator or a weak administrator in that person's eyes, and the judge will ultimately make most, if not all, the decisions. I can say when I look at the A side that I personally, in Pennsylvania, been around long enough to see that the profession grow from where the judges were basically using, and most of the state is rural. You're in one location where it's an urban center. But most of the state is rural, and most of the courts are small, and most of the judges have had their court administrators where they're secretaries. And that existed all the way up through the early 90s, and it was because of the growing profession, the professionalism of court administration, that I've seen the advent of more individuals coming on with advanced degrees and really assuming the role of being a true administrator as opposed to just being a responsible person to the president judge in our jurisdiction. So just my little microcosm snapshot of Pennsylvania, I think that we're going in the right direction.
Okay, thanks. Yes, ma'am. We'll take maybe this and maybe one other if they want, but.
I think I should start by with a slight disclaimer, and that is that I am not a court administrator. I am a court reporter. But I think both of these suggestions were rather polarizing. And, you know, I think traditionally there has been a disconnect between court reporters and court administrators. And one thing I've learned from that is that mutual respect is what will out. Mm-hmm. And so when I was the chief court reporter, the judge would listen to me, what I had to say, because he respected my position. Same way with me and the court administrator. And I think it's that mutual respect for what each person's job is that will make a better judicial system where you work. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, ready to move on? Yeah. All right, let's go over some of what has gone out in the surveys. Courts recognize administrative professionalism is actually in the current survey that's being released now. So we're still accepting responses, but 349 have responded so far before we got here a couple days ago. And the response rate at this point is likely at 2.2. Next, court administrators' knowledge base significantly broadens, is highly likely at 1.9. That scenario was in our 2013 survey. And then lastly, private sector starts attracting more clerks in court administrators, came to a 50-50 chance with 2.5.
The progression here is in terms of acknowledging professionalism. The court administrator is involved in more and more things in a wider variety of activities. And then the last question, which you can see came out as 50-50, is those new skills that they're developing, are they marketable? Maybe. We'll have to see. I think we're out of time, but we thank you very much. We want to hope that you at least were moved to be thinking about some of these things and where we're going to go, and to be thinking about where the most likely future is going to be. I'll leave you with the last quote that I just love is, if you're going to look ahead, You can look back, even look ahead, but always look around, because you never know when the next thing is going to come, sometimes from left field. Thank you very much. And the volunteers, if I could have the volunteers up here, we have a lovely parting gift for them.
You want to play the video?
Great job, guys. Don't forget to fill out the online evaluations at the end of the day. You should be getting text messages or emails about that. The conference organizers really appreciate it.